Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to show you how to make a gluten-free spaghetti squash gratin. It's naturally gluten-free to begin with, but I like to just reassure you that it will be. This recipe is really fast and easy, but it does take a long time. Most of that time is cooking our spaghetti squash before we can mix all of our ingredients together. This is something that you could do the day before or even 2 days before. Get your spaghetti squash all cooked and then mix all of your ingredients together. So this is about a 2.5 pound spaghetti squash. And if you've never seen one before, this is what it looks like. And if you've never heard of a spaghetti squash before, it's called a spaghetti squash because once you cook this and then scrape out the flesh from the skin here, it's in little strands. So it's kind of like spaghetti. So I always like to cut off the ends. Be very careful and have a very sharp knife when you are cutting a squash. Once you get the end cut off, you can have a flat surface to work with. And then it does have seeds on the inside. You could leave those in while you're baking it, but I always like to scrape them out first. So get a good sturdy spoon. So just scrape out the seeds, and you can see some of it is kind of shredding already, but it will shred more when it's cooked. And then I always try to get out the little bit of slimy stuff that is attached to the seeds. We don't want that in our squash gratin. And you also want a good sturdy spoon because you might bend your spoon trying to scrape out the inside. There we go. And all this in our bowl for the compost. You wash up really quick. And then I've got a 9x13 casserole dish here. We're going to place these face down, and then I'm going to fill up enough water, to maybe come up an inch. Maybe a 1/2 inch. That's probably not even a 1/2 inch. Just put some water in the bottom there. This will help steam and cook our squash more evenly. You could even cut your squash in half again if you want to, but I find that this works just as good and it's less cutting. And I don't think I mentioned, my oven is preheated to 375. So this will go in the oven for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, until the squash is all cooked through and really soft. So my spaghetti squash has been out of the oven. It's still pretty warm. So what I'm going to do, I've got everything set up, but I want to move it all aside. Let's do a little switcheroo here. My handy napkin trick for my cutting board to not slide around. So I want to scrape out the flesh of my spaghetti squash. Be careful not to get any of the skin in there. And it is still warm, but it's cool enough to handle. I like to put it on a plate because then I can spread it out and help it cool off faster. We don't want it to melt our cheese before it even gets in the oven. And this was in the oven for about an hour. In fact, I don't know if you could see on the top of this, I had poked a fork in through the skin to see if it was done. Move that aside. Don't get any pieces of the rind in there. You don't want to eat that. And it looked like a small spaghetti squash, but look at all of this. And then I like to just use my spoon and break it apart a little bit. You can see how it is these little shreds. But this way it will cool off a little bit quicker. This doesn't have to be ice cold. I just don't want it to melt my cheese before it goes in the oven. Although it's going to be melted in the oven anyways. If you cooked your squash the day before, then you would want it to kind of be at room temperature, or it will take longer in the oven. Let me get rid of this. So while that is cooling off, I've got 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream. I've greased a casserole dish here with butter. I've got 1 teaspoon each of salt and pepper. I have a small handful of sage leaves. These are from my garden, and they're mostly dried. When winter is coming and I start harvesting my herbs, I usually spread them out on a cookie sheet or even hang them up to dry. If they're not all the way dry, it's fine. You could even use fresh. And I'm aiming for about a tablespoon. You could use already dried sage, but the fresh sage is so much more flavorful. And then I've got a really big garlic clove and then just a regular size. This is to taste. Salt and pepper, whatever spice. You don't even have to use sage. You could use thyme, you could use marjoram. There's all different kinds or a combination of spices. And then you could add as much garlic as you want. And then I've got an 8-ounce block of Swiss cheese. I'm gonna get my herbs and my garlic cut up first and then grate my cheese. And it works out really good because we're waiting for the squash to cool off. I love growing fresh herbs. They're not in my garden, I just have them in pots on my patio. It's so handy. You can go out and pick a few if you need to. And when it's starting to get winter, you can pick them all and dry them, and then they're ready when you are. And it actually saves you a lot of money. Buying dried spices is usually kind of expensive. Doesn't mean I don't have dried spices, because I can't grow very many herbs, but I do my best. And I'm not even measuring. That looks like a tablespoon to me. Again, to taste. If you want more or less, do that. And then I'm going to go pretty fine mince on my garlic as well. I'm going to move my garlic aside just so I have room to grate my cheese. And then I'm aiming for about 2 cups of cheese. Usually an 8-ounce brick is about 2 cups of cheese. And I really like Swiss cheese in this recipe, but you could use a combination of cheeses. You could use your favorite cheese. It's really up to you. I love side dishes like this that are actually really easy and simple and minimal ingredients to put together. They're delicious. They're using vegetables that are in season. Aside from the bake time to cook your squash, it really doesn't take very long to make this at all. And if you're like me, this time of year, I've always got something in the oven. So if you could double up and throw in the squash yesterday and have it ready to go and then throw this side dish together today, that works even better. So there's all of my cheese. I'm not even going to measure. I'll give you the exact equivalent of 1 8-ounce brick. But again, if you like more cheese, do that. This recipe is really good with bacon in it too, in case you wanted to throw in some bacon. But this year I've got other side dishes that have bacon, so this one I'm leaving the bacon out. Now, just so I don't get excited and throw in all of my cheese, I do want to leave a good handful that will sprinkle on the top. And my squash is cooled off enough that I can start mixing everything together. I'm just going to put it all in this bowl here. And then some of the bigger chunks, I'm kind of breaking up a little bit. Get all of that. Just to make it easier to stir everything around. So in goes my 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream. And if your heavy cream is cold right out of the fridge, it will also help cool off your spaghetti squash a little bit more. And I always like to mix my spaghetti squash and cream together first it loosens up the squash enough to really get the garlic, sage, and cheese stirred in. So 1 teaspoon of salt and pepper, my 1 tablespoon of sage, and my garlic. And then give this a really good stir. Make sure to get all of those spices mixed around. And now for my cheese, most of my cheese I should say. There's about as much cheese as there is squash, but it's still a vegetable side dish. And then give this a really good stir, get it all mixed together. And my squash is the perfect temperature. It's not melting my cheese and making it harder to stir. So now we'll just go right into our casserole dish. I'm going to switch to my spatula. Don't want to leave any of it behind. And then I just spread it out. I always like to use a casserole dish where I have extra room in case it does puff up and maybe bubble over. And now I'm going to take the rest of my cheese and just sprinkle this on top. So this will go in the oven for about 45 minutes. If you made this yesterday and it's been in the fridge, add some extra bake time to get it warmed all the way through. And then if your casserole dish is full all the way to the top, put it on a cookie sheet just in case. And then if your cheese is getting too brown on the top, cover it with foil. Look at that. Golden, delicious, bubbly, cheesy. Smells amazing. Now this went for about 50 minutes in the oven. I like my cheese to get golden brown on the top like this. If you wanted your cheese to be even more golden, just leave it in the oven for a little bit longer, or you could even turn on the broiler for just a few seconds and get your cheese a little more golden. But I like it just like this. And I know it just came out of the oven, but I'm going to serve myself a small dish. You want to serve it hot, but you don't want to burn your mouth off. Make sure to get some crispy cheese on there. Okay, let's give it a bite. I'm going to spread it out a little bit, let it cool off. It smells so good. Very careful, it's hot. So good. And even though there is a lot of cheese in here and the heavy cream, it doesn't feel super heavy. I know sometimes gratin dishes like this can be really heavy and rich. And it is rich. There is cheese in here. But because of the spaghetti squash, it has a lighter feel to it. Don't get me wrong, I love a potato gratin. But something about spaghetti squash is absolutely delicious. So good. This is a perfect side dish for any holiday meal. It is just absolutely delicious. This recipe is one of those many recipes I always talk about. You can change the flavor every single time. All you have to do is add in a different kind of cheese, different spices, and you've got a whole new side dish that is the same, it's just different flavors. And if you haven't tried Swiss cheese yet, you really should. It is so delicious in something like this. Let me know what you think if you make this recipe. I hope you do. It is so good. And it's such a nice vegetable side dish for any holiday dinner. But thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. And I'll see you on the next one.